Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my presentation. Today we will be talking about civil engineering and more specifically on the architecture and town planning discipline of civil engineering. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. So first of all, what is civil engineering? Well, it is one of the oldest forms of engineering, since ancient civilizations. So for as long as there's been cities in human civilization, there has been a form of civil engineering, the concept of civil engineering. Now, what is this? What is civil engineering? So this deals with the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of infrastructure of buildings, roads, bridges, and other public works projects. There are many different sub-disciplines within civil engineering, such as, but not limited to, architecture slash town planning, structural engineering, transportation engineering, and many more, among others. Now, architecture and town planning. So they are both involved in the design and construction of buildings and infrastructure, as I mentioned. They also ensure that their projects comply with building codes, land use limitations, and other regulations according to state and municipal codes and ordinances. They are crucial to urban development, as they suit the needs of a specific or a general population in the area. Architecture and town planning, while they do go hand in hand together, they are two separate professions. Now, what is architecture? So architecture deals with the overall design and planning of buildings, bridges, and other structures. So when you see a building, you look at the design of it, how they made it. That's the work of architecture, that overall design of a building or the layout inside of a structure. Land architects, they can design the surrounding physical space around a structure. So if there's like an empty plot of land, so not like a huge space, but if there's like an empty lot, a land architecture can come in, look at that lot, and say, okay, you guys can use this patch of land for this or for that. This would be the best use for this land. Again, we're talking about like a small space around a building. And it also focuses on the aesthetics of a project and can include cultural, heritage, religious, artistic, and practical designs suited to the client's needs or demands. And it can also involve creating designs for ventilation, lighting, and room arrangements. Urban planning. It involves surveying and designing the land, roads, and cityscape on which buildings and structures will be built on. Planning takes population, economic, industry, landscape, and climate into account when designing cities. Planning usually involves coordinating closely with various other professionals, including, but not limited to, developers, government officials, policy influencers, corporations, contractors, architects, and even local citizens. Now, what are some examples of architecture? So right here, we have a few examples of my favorite examples. So on the left, if you're familiar with the band Mochadoma, it's a Belarusian band. They, on one of their more famous album covers, they have a perfect example of a brutalist architecture. So this building is a real building. It's a hotel in the country of Slovakia. And this brutalist architecture was very common in the Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc countries during the Cold War. On the right, we have a Spanish mission architecture, which, if you've lived here in California for a long time or visited around California, you will know that this is a very common architecture and design here in California, modeled after the original Spanish missions built by the Spanish during colonial times. On the left, we have another one of my favorites. I hope I say it right. Guji or Googie architecture, which is very common back in the 1950s and 60s during the atomic / space race era. And on the right, we have a Gothic revival architecture, which is very common among churches, more specifically a lot of Catholic churches. But you may also see some modern buildings modeled after this architecture. Now, what are some examples of town planning? So if you're familiar with Kowloon City, Hong Kong, this was a small space of land that was once known as the most densely populated place on Earth to have ever existed. I believe it spanned a few city blocks and housed somewhere around 50,000 people. Well, in the late 80s, the Hong Kong government decided to demolish this and turn it into a park. So as you see on the left, that's what it looked like before, and on the right, that's how it looks like now. So this is the work of town planning. On the left, we have a street that's been modified to incorporate a traffic circle, and on the right, we have example of a before and after plot of land in San Luis Obispo. On the left, used to be a field, and on the right, it's now a booming community. This is all the works of town planning. I hope you guys learned something today. Thank you for tuning in to my presentation. Hope you guys have a good night.